And that leads us to another exciting edition of Tasteful News with our good friend Jamie Noodles McLennan, the former NHL goaltender turned TSN hockey analyst. And Jamie, you just heard Pierre LeBrun say it. A modified no-trade clause for Toronto Maple Leafs forward William Nylander kicks in this Saturday. If Willie Nylander's not signed before then, and it sounds like there's some progress towards maybe getting him signed, but if he's not signed at that point, do you have to move him before Saturday, do you think?
I don't think so, because it's not like he's not under contract for next season. You do have the luxury of having all the way till the trade deadline to do something if you can't get it sorted out. So it's not like there's a deadline for him to be unrestricted, and then it's the Johnny Gaudreau situation like we saw in Calgary. So William Nylander is under contract for one more year. Yes, you mentioned the modified no trade kicks in, so that does tie your hands a little bit. But a lot of times, if you're making a trade, you want to work with the player to make sure that it works well for both organizations. So I do believe there is some flexibility. And if the Toronto Maple Leafs do want to sign him, like it sounds like they want to do that, then they work through the deadline and make sure something sorts out. But I don't think it's imperative you have to move him or have him signed by this Saturday.
Okay, Jamie, let's talk about Pierre-Luc Dubois. Over the weekend, it seemed like he was very much on his way to the Los Angeles Kings. Now, our Darren Dreger is saying that the Montreal Canadiens might be back in this thing. We're going to talk to John Liu, our Winnipeg Bureau Chief, about this later in the show. But what I want to ask you is, Jamie, it seems to me that if the Habs wanted to, say, include Kirby Dach in a deal, they could probably get this deal done. Should they be doing that? Even though Dach and Dubois are really close in age, closer than I think people realize. Do you just swap big center for big center and be done with it? Like, should Montreal be doing everything they can to acquire this guy who really, truly wants to play there?
I think they should. Now, it has to fit, and you take a look at moving forward what you're going to have down the middle of the ice. Nick Suzuki is their cornerstone. He's their captain. No problem. You've got Caulfield on the wing, I think he's a stud, and he's going to be a top-tier goal scorer in this league. So you take a look at how you want to be built down the middle of the ice. Now, Dach is a big, strong centerman. So is Pierre-Luc Dubois. Now, Dubois brings a little bit different dynamic because he's a lot more aggressive than Kirby Dach. So if they do covet that different type of player, maybe different flavor of player, even though Dach is a big body, I think Pierre-Luc Dubois at this time in his career is a better player than Kirby Dach. Now, Dach has a lot more to, give. There's a bigger ceiling for him. But at the end of the day, if Pierre-Luc Dubois, if they can find a way to make it fit and maybe keep everybody that we're talking about in this equation, that's a win for the Montreal Canadiens. You have to try and acquire him because Pierre-Luc Dubois, he's a very tough player to play against, and that's what you want in your organization.
Now, the Calgary Flames. You were just in Calgary. I can imagine nobody at all was talking to you about their situation, Jamie. It is pretty wild right now. Elias Lindholm, though, according to our Pierre LeBrun, has actually not said that he won't re-sign with the team. There's different reports out there that said maybe he's already said he doesn't want to sign. According to Pierre LeBrun, he says, no, he hasn't said that yet, but he also hasn't committed to this team long-term either. If you're Craig Conroy, Jamie, when do you need a real verbal commitment from Lindholm that he's going to be around long-term? How soon do you need that if you're Conroy?
As soon as possible, because you're trying to build your team for next year and the future. You do have some teams that are some players that are under long-term contracts right now. If you want him to be that one, you got to find out what's best for him, his family, and your organization moving forward. But again, it's a situation where, William Nylander's going through that, and we just talked about with the Toronto Maple Leafs. They're still under contract for another season, so you cost control that, but the clock is ticking. If you do want an extension, you got to figure out what that term is, what the number is, and if he wants to stay. If he doesn't want to stay, now it's finding a suitor. And if he wants to sign an extension with the new team, they would trade him too. So there's lots of factors. So coming back to your question, you want to find out sooner than later, but you still have a little bit more time. You're not racing against the clock, per se, this weekend we're talking about.
Let's talk about the Taylor Hall trade. He goes to Chicago. It's essentially a salary dump by the Boston Bruins. Chicago, one of the only teams in the league that's taking on any salary, as our insiders alluded to. But do you actually like the fit of this deal? You got the former #1 overall pick in Hall going to play with a potential #1 overall pick in Bedard. Maybe Nick Foligno, who's apparently interested in staying in Chicago, also joins the team. Hey, this kid needs players to play with, right, Jamie? And these two players are veterans that could definitely help him in his first year.
100%. And I believe that Chicago needs to add more players like that around Connor Bedard to, we'll say, shield him of the first couple of years in the National Hockey League, where Chicago clearly bottomed out. They got the golden goose. They believe they can build the team around him and moving forward. So it started today. You get Taylor Hall. You might add Nick Foligno if you can get something sorted out. And you still need to add depth and talent and veteran presence around Connor Bedard. So I think you need to do more of these moves to add to the depth of the organization so that you're not the worst team in the National Hockey League, and Bedard has some really lean years that hurt his development. This is all about his development as well, making sure that he can reach to his full potential in the National Hockey League sooner than later. So you need to add more players like Taylor Hall around him.
I've kept you for a long time, but I just have one more for you, and it's about a market you know very well, Ottawa. And very interesting over the weekend, Jamie. Erik Karlsson spoke to the Swedish media in Nashville there for the draft, and he said something very interesting. He said he would be open to a trade back to the Ottawa Senators. We all know how great he was there. I mean, he was one of the greatest players in the league when he played in Ottawa. He's a little older now, but he obviously just come off a terrific season in San Jose. Do you see it as a potential fit?
The question is who's going the other way, because Jake Sanderson has to be off the table. Jacob Chikrin, you just arrived in a trade right at the deadline. You've got Shabbat there. You've got Artem Zub under term. So that's a four-pack that's as good as anybody in the National Hockey League. So if you're acquiring Erik Karlsson, who's going the other way to add him into your mix, and how does that pairing fit? Now, Erik Karlsson, he's a Norris caliber defenseman every year when he's healthy. So bottom line is, if you can make him fit, and maybe San Jose choose some of his salary, you make him an $8 or $9 million defenseman, I think you do everything you can to try and fit him in. But again, my question to anybody talking about this trade is who's going the other way? Because that's certainly going to weaken your organization, because you might have to pay a king's ransom to get a guy like Erik Karlsson and ask San Jose to chew on some of his salary. So that would be the question I would pose to other people, but he would be a fit in Ottawa. He was brilliant there. The fans love him, and that team's heading in the right direction.
It would be a great story to see him go back. But to your point, Jamie, 4 years, $11.5 million a season on his contract. He's 33 years old. So Mike Grier would definitely have to eat a little bit of that contract to make any deal happen, it would seem. Great to talk to you, buddy. You were terrific once again on this edition of The Tasteful